Hello, Flame community. This is Jeff Kyle with the Flame Learning Channel. The color coding and marker systems have seen an impressive expansion in the Flame 2025.1 update, bringing about some serious organizational changes that are sure to keep even the most complicated of projects in order. In this video, we'll be covering the changes to both the color coding and marker systems, going over everything new and how to make the most out of the changes. Starting off with color coding, previous versions of Flame allowed for the ability to set a color on segments in the timeline or sequences on the desktop or in the media panel, but it was mostly up to you to keep track of what the colors mean. What we have now is the ability to associate labels with colors that will make our color decision-making clear and transparent for the rest of our facility or to anyone who inherits our work. We can find the legend for this color coding under Preferences, System, and then Color Coding. Here, we have the ability to create color associations for the media panel and timeline segments, for markers, and for nodes inside a batch. By default, all of the labels will be set to the same names you might be familiar with from previous versions of Flame, but with right-click, we can change them based on however we're used to working. For example, if I consider red to be needs revision, green approved, bright green posted, gold delivered, and black inactive, then when I close the preferences and right-click here in the media panel, under color, I can see all of those labels right here in the dropdown, clear as ever. Switching back to the preferences, and I've changed a few more of these from the default. As we can see, this legend has separate categories for the timeline and media panel, as well as markers and batch. When a clip is color-coded in batch, its name just beneath the clip indicates its color. Similarly, we can now set the color of nodes in batch, which will have the node names colored based on the color coding. The batch color coding, as we saw in the preferences, has a different legend from the timeline and media panel as well as the markers, so we can be as organized as we need to be, wherever it makes sense. The one thing to keep in mind here is that since clips exist both inside and outside of batch, they follow the timeline and media panel legend as opposed to the batch legend, since clips can exist in both locations. On top of this, color coding is searchable in a handful of areas, including batch. With some color coding set up, I can use the search box to search for a particular color or label, and then jump right to that node in my batch schematic. With all of this in mind, it's important to note that if you're working with color-coded content from other facilities, or with other artists at your facility who work with a different color coding system than you, there's a few things to keep in mind. The first has to do with receiving content with a label that we don't have set in our preferences. For example, I have an archive here with content saved from a different project and with different color coding settings than me. When I restore that content and look at the color coding, we'll see from the custom field here that they used a label called revision needed, but I'm calling it needs revision. Any label conflicts like this will always appear in this custom field, giving us an insight into what color was associated with their label, and also telling us that we don't have that label in our project. As another example, if we receive content with a label that we do have set in our preferences, then the color of the content in question will respect our color coding that we have set in our preferences. For instance, I have a clip here in this archive that I made in another project where approved is blue. In this project here, as we saw earlier, approved is green. Even before I restore the clip into my project, I can see the color is green, and once I restore the content and take a look at the color field, since it was set to approved, it's now colored green because to me, approved is green. Another way of looking at this type of scenario is that the label takes priority over the color when it comes to color coding conflicts. Finally, since color coding is a system-wide preference, it'll affect all other projects and any other users on the machine, but it also has its own configuration file and an entry in the sysconfig file for even more facility-wide management. The sysconfig file points to a color coding file located in opt Autodesk CFG, and when I open it up, we can see that all of the labels I set earlier are right here. This file can be manually adjusted or set inside of Flame and then centralized to set the color legend for the entire company. Markers are a different way to stay organized, and they too have seen some changes in the Flame 2025.1 update. To start, here in the timeline, if you're familiar with the marker button from previous versions of Flame, you'll notice that its appearance has changed just a bit, and a few of the other buttons, like the proxy quality box, have shifted around to make room for it. We now have a drop-down to the right of the marker button, giving us the list of marker colors and labels that we can set, as well as a few settings. We can choose to add a marker, which appears in the time bar just like it did before, but now we have the option of clicking to add a segment marker, which will appear on the segment underneath our positioner. We can also use this checkbox to cover the full segment for either markers or segment markers, which will give us the expanded marker that spans the full duration of the clip underneath our positioner. Taking a look at our Add Marker dialog box, we have a new marker token called Marker Index, allowing us to have our marker number with as much padding as we would like, and it can dynamically update depending on its positioning relative to other markers. If you're like me and you've accidentally moved a marker when you meant to move your positioner, then we now have the ability to lock a marker's position so it can no longer be adjusted accidentally or otherwise. We have two new timeline level tokens, marker name and marker comment, whereby we can specify which marker to display with the @ symbol, followed by the marker index, and we can also specify all of them with the plus symbol, followed by the number 1, giving us some extra control over the names of our clips with markers. If we want to change how the Add Marker dialog box works, we have a preference located under User, Timeline, and over here on the right under Add Markers. It gives us the option to either have the name field or the comment field highlighted when the marker dialog box opens, allowing us to quickly adjust either the name of the marker or the comment when it's created. And the last option here is to skip the dialog box altogether if we're satisfied with the default name and comment, making for some rather quick marker creation, especially when we're using the Add Marker keyboard shortcut / or the Segment Marker keyboard shortcut Shift /. Speaking of keyboard shortcuts, we have a few new marker keyboard shortcuts, most notably Add Full Length Marker, set to keyboard shortcut Flame or Command /, and Add Full Length Segment Marker, which is set to Shift, Flame or Command /. If we open up the Markers panel with keyboard shortcut Control 5, we can take a look at some other new additions. We now have the ability to import and export markers. Here in the Markers panel, we can right-click and export markers, giving us the option to export either as Autodesk Flame XML or CSV, with some further specifications to include either all of the markers or the selected markers, and then in the case of the CSV, to include all of the columns or just the ones that are visible. While the XML format is meant to be used exclusively with Flame family applications, the CSV format can be used with any application that accepts the format, such as Microsoft Excel. When it comes to importing markers, if I switch to this other timeline here, I can right-click, Import Markers, choose this XML, and all of these markers are brought in just like that. One important note here is that when importing markers this way, Flame is relying on the timecode position of the markers to control where they're placed. If the sequence the markers were exported from is a different timecode than the sequence they're being imported into, you might run into an alignment issue. But to get around this, you can always copy and paste markers, which is as easy as selecting them either in the timeline or here in the Markers panel, right-click, and copy. Then, if I switch to another timeline, I can right-click and paste, and all of the markers are pasted based on the location of the positioner. Finally, if you're working with the Connected Conform, there are a few new options for handling syncing. To start, if we head back to Preferences, User, and the Timeline tab, over on the left, under Connected Segments, we have the option to copy markers on sync, which will dictate whether or not markers come across when we sync connected segments. For example, I have two sequences here. One has quite a few segment markers set up on clips that have segment connections, and the other does not. If I select all of the segments in this sequence, right-click, Sync Connected Segments, and take a look at this other sequence, we can see that the markers have been sent to the corresponding clips successfully. If you don't want to sync the whole segment, first, I'll just make a few adjustments here. I'll change the color of this one and change its positioning. Then, back into the Markers panel, we can select the markers we'd like to sync, right-click, and Sync Connected Segment Markers to send the selected markers to whichever other segments they're connected to. I can even change the marker type, and when I sync the marker, it updates everywhere the segment is connected. If you like these videos and you're finding them helpful, please subscribe to the Flame Learning channel and click the bell to stay notified about new content. Feel free to comment any questions or suggestions below. Until next time, thanks a bunch for watching.